The boss asks the employee, do you believe in life after death? Employee says, meh, really no proof of it. Boss says, well, there is now, because after you left yesterday for your grandma's funeral, she called looking for you. Anyway, guys, it's been a pleasure being here today. Our last and final panel will be tips and tricks for scaling your small business. It will be led by moderator Kimberly Ratcliff.
Hello, everyone. So we have some awesome women leaders here on this panel. Again, my name is Kimberly Ratcliff. I own a family-owned meat company where we are turnkey. So I own the cattle to the end process. Located in East Texas, and I'm going to let each one of these individuals introduce themselves.
Good afternoon. Oh, am I on? No. Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Lisa Fullerton. I am the president and CEO of A Novel Idea, which does business as Auntie Anne's Pretzels in Cinnabon. We like to say we've been making taste buds smile since 2000.
Nice. I love how everyone just smiles and starts shaking their heads after they hear Auntie Anne's. That's exactly what I did. I was like, are you bringing pretzels? Oh,
I have
God.
free pretzel cards for everybody.
I know, so exciting. My name's Reagan Hales. I am the owner of the Fractional company, which is an outsourced CFO fractional advisory company. And I also do mergers and acquisitions advisory through a company called Eminence Strategies.
And I'm Olga Bashkatova. I'm the owner of NextStage Advisory. It's different from what Reagan does. We only do accounting and bookkeeping and all of that. But I started working, so I've been an accountant for over 20 years. And when I first started my company 7 years ago, we were focused on startups, which are actually venture-backed startups, which is what the word's usually used for. So, that are scaling super rapidly. So I have a lot of experience with that. I also spent a third of my life working in-house with startups, with venture-backed startups. And now we're focused on working with residential HVAC companies and making sure that they're getting the most out of their business and positioning them for an exit so that they can have a great retirement. So that's what we do. Thank you.
All right, so let's just dig right into it. Lisa, I'm going to ask you this first. What is the ideal customer when we're targeting for growth?
I think a lot of that depends on where, if you are in a venue like we are in brick and mortar spaces. So for Auntie Anne's Pretzels in Cinnabon, as you would probably, I hope you know, our best marketing tool is smell. And so we have to be in enclosed areas where we are highly captivated audiences, and we have to work on repeatability. So for us, we've got to go into high traffic areas. We know we are an impulse buy, and we sample to get that taste in your mouth in hopes that you'll stop at the counter.
Anyone else want to tackle that question at all?
Ideal customer for growth. I think kind of it depends on you as a business owner. I work with all sorts of different clients. I've worked with marketing agencies. I've worked with manufacturers. I've worked with companies really across the spectrum. And when we talk about growth, I think a lot of times it really is up to them what they want to see as far as growth. Are they looking for growing their current product lines? Are they looking for different product lines, different product segments? In my M&A work right now, I'm working with a company trying to scale. They're actually trying to decide, are they going to scale or are they going to exit? And they're at a point where they've reached a capacity on innovation. They don't have enough money internally to innovate new products. They don't have the bandwidth from a staffing perspective. They don't have bandwidth from a capital perspective. And so they've just really reached a ceiling. So they're looking externally for investors for an injection of capital for growth. They've tried to do that on their own for a long time, and they just keep hitting a limit. So I think sometimes you kind of have to look inward to kind of your current talent, your current staff, yourself as a leader, and go, what are we really capable of? Can we do this on our own? Do we need to look externally for help? And sometimes it's not necessarily just the customer that you have to look at, it's also internally as to yourself on what you're capable of.
And I would just like to share my own personal story, for example. So for the last 7 years since I started my business, we started working with startups, but startups is very general, right? So startups yes, there were a lot of tech startups, but startups can be in any industry, right? And so as a business, it's really important when you're scaling to have a very concrete message for the people who are buying your service or your product, right? And when you're a generalist and you're trying to sell to everybody at the same time, it's really hard to have a very direct message and that sells to their pain points. And so that's why over the last couple of years I've kind of I've done a lot of research, and I had for myself decided that I want to focus on one industry, actual vertical industry, not a horizontal niche like startups, right, which is based on size of the company, or what kind of the fact that they're venture backed, for example. So that's like a horizontal slice, but instead focusing on a vertical industry. It's actually a super powerful tool for scaling, because it helps you hone in on the right message for that category. And so now we can, for example, focus all my marketing on residential HVAC. They all have the same pain points, right? It doesn't matter, especially regionally, for example, right? Here in Texas, like we're focused on AC more than heating, for example, right? We all have the same seasonality, and so that makes it so much easier to scale my business, right? And so that's something that I think everybody should think about for themselves and the work that they're in.
And I'll just throw mine. Mine are anyone that eats meat. That's number one. So as long as you eat meat, you're my target audience. But I do narrow it down a little bit more. A lot of times I tell people, for me, it starts with telling a story. And I'll just do a really brief story about myself. I actually left the big New York City and moved back to my family ranch. And I tell my story, especially as a woman business owner, the fear of leaving a six-digit job and going to a position where you knew you weren't gonna make that money. And I use that story to my advantage on how I developed this company to where it is now. So if anything, when I think of target growth, the number one thing is everyone has a story out there. Start with your story and see where your story brings you into the business area, and it will guide you, believe me, to the right location. So with that being said, let's kind of still think about that target growth and like growing fast versus growing slow. A lot of times, and I'll just give my first example, is being a woman in this male-dominated industry. I get a lot of people that, as women businesses, they have to have that woman business check mark on their books, right? And not having many women that are in this meat industry, I get a lot of contacts from there, but are they all good? Are they all worth my growing to that business? So a lot of times you have to analyze, is it growing slow just because they might need your business? Or is it growing fast? So let's talk about that a little bit. Who wants to take that one on?
You want to talk about managing growth?
Yeah, the managing growth, yep.
I'll start, because I think we probably all have our opinions about that. The way I did it was not necessarily the way everybody needs to do it, but in my own personal opinion, because getting into the brick and mortar space is expensive. Each location costs between $250,000 to $400,000. And I did get all of my stores paid for through the SBA loan process, which means I had to inject my own personal capital. So nothing keeps you up at night more than remember or thinking about how I'm going to pay back those loans. But for me, I think it's very important to wait that first year in business to make sure you understand the full life cycle of an annual year. I think one of the panelists said earlier, they joked that I made money and then I had to pay my taxes. So I think it's important to get through an entire year to make sure you know the business trends. It's very cyclical in our industry. We're predominantly malls and airports. So I think it's important to know your customers, to know the seasonality, to know your expense structure, to set up your KPIs. I guess we'll talk about KPIs later, but to keep your eye on 4 or 5 easy to calculate key indicators of how well your business is doing. But in some cases, instead of actually going in and doing another brick and mortar expansion, there's organic growth within your organization. So it could be, I could better manage my cost of goods. If I can cut 1% off of a cost of goods for $1 million company, that's a $10,000 profit of not spending a dime, but just becoming more efficient. In my business, it's kind of interesting, and it's just very simple. If you're looking at a brick and mortar space and determining if you want to grow another location, being as a part of a franchise system, you actually have financials that you have to submit to your franchisor every year. And they put together a worksheet that shows what average expenses should be according to other people within your revenue frame. So that's very, very helpful to see how your peers are doing. But the other thing is they teach you, if you're looking at a second location, stand in front of that location and do how many people walk past the space you're considering building out for a 5-minute frame, and then apply a 5 to 7% of capture rate. If you do that times an average price of your product, that helps you determine, again, you have to do this many times a day, different times of the year, but this really helps you extrapolate and do a healthy forecast. So I think knowing your market, knowing the feasibility and the income and the survivability of that location. My dad was in real estate, location. I think those are a few things, but if you can't afford to go into another location, I would encourage you to look at organic growth and just improvements that you can do by better managing your KPIs.
So I'm going to say something that maybe a lot of people have never heard in here or don't look favorably on, but not all growth is good. I know if you're a banker because you're shaking your head, especially when that growth is too fast, it's mismanaged, and you're not ready for it. When I started my fractional CFO business, I was actually going to help a lot of kind of early stage businesses that were just managing cash flow. But I've ended up helping businesses that are in this scaling stage that got way out of control because they got over leveraged, they hired too fast, they bought too much equipment, they got way too much debt, and the business got away from them. Because they got so scared that they weren't going to make money, they got so scared that they were going to lose clients, and they grew too quickly. And I think that as business owners, myself being one of them, we do get nervous early on when we start our businesses because we do want to start seeing revenue come in. But I think sometimes the business gets going so quickly that oftentimes we don't slow down to put those policies, the procedures, those operational pieces in place. A lot of y'all, when you start thinking, when someone says, get to know your financials, does it give you hives? Does it? It does, because I know you, because you're my clients. But you need to learn your financials, because if you don't and your business gets away from you quickly, you're going to panic and your business is not going to be successful. If you survive those first 2 years and you grow quickly, guess what? That next 2 to 5 years when you're growing fast, that's when that fails. So my opinion on growth is that yes, absolutely, we want to grow, but we want to grow smart. So take those first 2 years, take them slow, be thoughtful about it, get that team around you like Amy was talking about, get your bookkeeper, get your attorney, get your CPA. Find someone that's going to educate you on operational practices, who's going to educate you on what a balance sheet is, what all those terms in your financials mean. If you don't have a CPA or a banker that's going to take time out and explain to you definitions, you got the wrong banker and you got the wrong CPA. I'm just telling you. But take the time to get all that stuff in place before you grow. Because if you don't, any pace state of growth that you get into later on is going to be so hard to manage that you're going to wish you weren't growing. But that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, and to reiterate some of that, so I'm in a service business, and the companies that I work with are also in the service business. And it's not, we don't have these, crazy cash outlays that retail stores do, for example, when it comes to expansion. But the worst thing that you can do in a service business is expand rapidly, get all these customers, and then you can't actually service them, and your quality of service goes down, right? So before you do that, it's important, like Reagan said, to have all the processes to understand, okay, how do we make sure that our quality of service stays the same as we grow, right? How do we keep bringing on people, training them? How do we make our process super standard and repeatable, right? Those are the keys to scaling. You have to be able to, in mass, repeat what you're doing and maintain the same quality, right? And so how do we do that? And I kind of just lost track of my thought, but
That was really good information, though.
Hey, you're too young for that, Olga.
Well, and there's a word that I talked to someone about. It's like that feeling of capacity.
oh my God, thank you.
When
Yes.
you can't deliver,
what I was gonna say.
it's like when you can no longer deliver your service at a quality that you're happy with, you've reached that capacity.
So thank you. So it's knowing your,
Atta girl.
thank you so much. So it's knowing the utilization basically of your people, right? And understanding their capacity, how much more work can they handle to maintain that quality level, right? So how many new customers can you take on at a certain size? And so you have to plan all that in advance before, especially in a service business, before you start thinking about growth. So you just have to plan it like Reagan said.
Can I add one thing to that?
Absolutely.
So one thing that came back in my business is we had lots of opportunities to grow. When you've got national brands and people want you in their locations, but not every location is a proper location, or some are good locations, but not the right time in the life cycle of our business. So we had 2 locations that we are in that we said no to the first time around. And what happened was the market in 2008 and 9, when it began to wilt, we became opportunistic. So that's another reason. Don't feel like you're leaving something on the table because you can't accommodate it in your business or you don't have staffing to grow. Because another thing that we typically do is when we know we're going to expand, we overhire and have people in our stores that we are planning to use when we expand. So those are the things that sometimes you can't accept locations you'd like to because your infrastructure and foundation isn't quite there yet. But the good news is it can come back around. In our case, it was a much better deal.
I think a lot of this conversation is also around the feasibility type study we've been talking about and how expensive it is. And I'm sure there's a lot of resources out there to do feasibility studies, but maybe there's some metrics that we could use. We've talked before on some of the metrics that we can use as companies to look at if we should scale or we should not scale. So let's talk about those metrics a little bit.
So metrics, or we also talked before about some resources, maybe?
Yeah, metrics and resources.
Yeah.
We can do that.
So for resources, so for example, when I was doing my research to figure out which industry I wanted to focus on. So some people, when they're looking at industries, they kind of say, okay, well, who do I like working with? You know, I'm 90% of my business is already these sort of people or these sort of businesses. That's who I'm going to focus on. That was not my approach. So I started like very holistically looking at different kinds of service businesses, and the resources that I found super, super helpful was census.gov, right? So that's where the government is giving us so much data, and literally and I'm a numbers person, right? So it's like gold to me. So you're downloading these crazy spreadsheets of all this information. You have by industry, by the NAICS industry code, which of course they also explain what all those codes are. You have information about number of companies by state, and nationwide within each particular code. Their number of employees, their, I think, annual payroll total that they spend on payroll. So this is all super valuable information, and it kind of helps you understand how many of these potential clients are in your area, right? That's serviceable to you, and how big are they? And so that you can look at tranches like of number of employees, for example, and you'll kind of understand their size, right? So this is really great. They also have at census.gov, they have economic outlook reports by industry, by region, just kind of like general economic outlook for U.S. economy out there. There's also another website, NIST.gov, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. They also have annual reports and industry statistics. Another one is Statista.com. They just have, it's a private site, it's not a government site, and they just have all kinds of statistics that are industry related out there. And then just separately, I think it's really important when you're looking at whether it's a project or it's a new investment or new location, new service that you're thinking about, or you're thinking of buying another company versus building something out yourself. It's really important to look at the break-even point. And so you're basically looking to see how much revenue does this need to generate for it to cover all of the fixed and variable expenses. And how long is that going to take, right? And where are you going to get the money for that? That's another really important aspect.
Yeah, piggybacking on that, I think every time I was working with a woman in Bernie who owned a gym studio for women, and she wanted to open a second location. And we ran a cost of growth and a break-even analysis for her on what that second location was going to cost. Because I told her, I said, growth is not free. Like the day you open that second location, you lost money. And she was like, she gave me this really sad look. Coffee did not go the way she thought it was that day. And I said, it's not. But hey, let's figure out when you are going to make that dollar. And we ran through super quick spreadsheet. Took us 5 minutes, basic math, and she was like, okay, like it's gonna take me a little under 3 months. I need to save up this. Okay, and so she knew going in what it was gonna take her. It was about approximately just under 3 months of what a normal run rate would be. So she had no surprises. And I think if you can kind of go into something, whether you're adding a product line, the marketing firm, again in Bernie, doing really well in Bernie these days. She was going to hire a designer. We kind of did the same thing, a break-even analysis on a hire. She just needed to know kind of once I bring this person in, like when is this going to pay off? Well, we kind of did a back, kind of recalculation of when these clients, how long it took to bring in a client, usually the payout when kind of those projects paid off. And so she was like, okay, makes sense to bring this person in. So if you can kind of take the time to do a little bit of those analysis or have someone help you set that up real quick on the front end, and this is like 3rd grade math, y'all. 3rd grade math, we can all do this. If you can take the time to do that so that you realize what this will cost you on the front end, you're gonna save yourself a lot of angst and worry up front, and you can plan for this because it isn't free. It doesn't happen the day you make that investment. The other thing I would say when we're talking about KPIs, sorry to run long, this is where your marketing department and your finance department get to play together. This is where you go to your marketing department and you say, hey, what is our conversion rate on our marketing campaigns? When we're spending all of our money on our social media, how quickly is that turning into a sale? When we're running this type of campaign on X, Y, or Z, are we retaining those customers? When we're doing X, Y, or Z, how quickly is that turning into dollars? Like those types of things, if you're planning growth and you're planning another service or product, you need to know kind of what those numbers mean so you can plan for how quickly they're gonna change into dollars in your pocket. So if you're not kind of seeing how your marketing numbers are translating into your dollars and your revenue, you need to start looking at those two pieces.
It's critical in our business, in the food industry, retail industry, because we're a very low profit business. I know people would look at lines in our stores and our malls and say that can't be low profit, but expenses are dramatic. So I've 5 expenses, like our credit cards, 1 year were over $100,000. So that's a cost people would not consider would be so great. So I look at the KPIs monthly, and so did my leadership team. One of the things that we've talked about with growth in my company is we really need to understand what our exit strategy is going to be so that we are not growing and building more complexity and not figuring out how it is that we're going to get out of business. So in 2021, we actually sold all of our mall-based business to a large firm, and they're experts at operations. Well, my love language is like legal, legislative. I do a lot of advocacy work. I actually sit on Governor Abbott's Small Business Advisory Task Force, which helps feed into the items that we are asking our legislators to focus on in the next legislative session. So I get to do what I love, and I actually am able to pair with somebody that's got an expertise in an area that I can do and I enjoy, but it's not my love language. So I think the more we can revolve our businesses around making sure that we're doing the things that we're good at, it feels a lot less like work. So I was actually looking at selling our mall stores and was contemplating a growth opportunity, which we were saved by COVID and didn't wind up doing it. But in our industry, having a long lease is actually a part of the value that you're like, you guys are probably book of business and sales leads, but in our industry, it's the length that you have on your lease. So that's a little bit maybe contrary to some of the growth strategies you guys might be looking at, but.
And just to throw mine in there is everything I do, I probably run break-evens more than anything. And I run break-evens on every single cut of meat, every single cut of everything. So if I would say that the best start for you to do is to run a break-even on every product. And if that product isn't able to make profit, then you might need to consider what my next question is, an exit strategy. So I think a huge thing is a lot of times we've worked so hard and we're like, oh God, I want to keep going, but I got to go in my 401k, or I got to go in my retirement, or I have to go grab from here and there just to keep this business going. And sometimes it's that worth it for twofold. For me, I came home because I wanted a generational business. So if you're doing all this and you don't have anyone else to come back to the business, you just lost your 401k, your retirement, to something that's not necessarily going to be passed down to anyone. And then also, I'm throwing a lot of questions in here because we don't have a whole lot of time. Also, is it worth trying to find a partner instead of trying to do everything else? And then identifying those markets that you should be in and shouldn't be in, and maybe eliminating those that aren't making that break even. So this is kind of like a 3-part question for us.
Can I take it first?
So you can answer which one you want. For me, I'll be honest, my main thing is generational wealth. For me, it's how am I building up this generational wealth for a family farm, business, everything. That's where the meat company evolved, is because that's what I felt what generational wealth is. Because with my business, if you're a farming business, all families are in. No matter what, my brothers are in it, everyone's in it. So I got to find a business that everyone can be in, and some businesses aren't like that. So my plan was a little bit different. So exit plan, business wealth, generational wealth, and is partnership the way to do these exit plans?
So I wanted to mention a couple of things here. So you're looking to create generational wealth and to pass down your business. So I read some statistics. I love statistics. So over 60% of people who own businesses consider giving their business on to their kids, right, or relatives. However, only 30% do. So that's something super interesting. 59% go through a sale. So whether it's a management buyout through your partners, or it's a PE buyout, or another firm buys you, that's really the 60% there. And then another, that's to another third party. And 31% do a management buyout to partners. So that's a lot to consider. And another, I think we're going to see a lot more. So there's a lot of PE activity going on right now, private equity activity and buyouts, all across industries. So in construction trades, in healthcare, there's a lot going on. And it's happening because there's not as much succession and passing down as maybe there was before. And so we also have a lot of boomers retiring. We have, I think, 10,000 people per day turning 65 in America. And so they have nobody to pass down their businesses to, they're selling. And so there's gonna be all this mergers and acquisitions. And this is something for everyone to consider as you're building your business. You should be thinking about, how can I build it up to sell it to a third party for a lot of money so that I can retire in the Caribbean, right? So that's what we all should be thinking about. Most of us are not doing IPOs, right? So we're either going the PE path, or it's a strategic buy from a competitor or a bigger company that wants to be in this region. And in terms of partners, just really quickly, I think it's also really important that yes, as you're scaling, you're bringing on partners, but again, there are many different ways to have the financial relationship with your partners. So someone mentioned before, I think it was Amy from Roofer Trucks, she mentioned that she had a line of credit with her supplier. That's a partnership, right? We can also have revenue shares, right? We can give out equity, which I don't recommend. We can have commissions. And so those are all things that we need to think about, and they're all negotiable, right? So it depends on your business. Passing on.
So I started my CFO business after I'd been doing M&A, mergers and acquisitions work for a few years, and watched owners who'd owned their businesses for years just not have financial strategic help. Their CPAs or their attorneys just weren't answering the questions right. And one thing that I think a lot of owners didn't understand was this whole concept of the second bite of the apple. And it's the idea of growing your business with someone else's money. There comes a point in your business where you can get to a point where you're doing well, you're growing, and you can be growing really well. Actually, this business that I'm working with, he was my CFO client. He was one of those ones that grew too fast, had way too much money, it outgrew him, he had no operational structure whatsoever. Last year, I think he made just under $1 million. This year, he's on path to make $9 million. Crazy. And so now he's looking at an exit, but he's not doing the retire in the Caribbean. We are actually getting him a second bite of the apple, which means he's going to get a partner, a private equity injection, to where he will give up a percentage of his ownership in the company, keep the equity for probably 5 to 8 years, and then eventually sell again, get another percentage of that sale, and create multi-generational wealth. So things happen. Did he see that coming a year ago? Lord, no. He was trying to pay his bills. But things happen, and they happen out of the blue sometimes when you're not ready. I think, kind of going back to Kim's point, you've got to be prepared as best as you can. Again, it's slowing down, getting things in order, and not just looking at things that are happening here and now. It's trying to go, okay, got to make sure right now it's being taken care of, but where am I in 5 years? Where am I in 20 years? What happens if everything in my head is gone because, something happens to my health tomorrow, or something happens? Because a lot of you guys do have everything up here in your head, and if you're taken out of that business, your business is out, which maybe means your families aren't taken care of. So, when we're talking exit strategies, those plans, and I tell this to every business owner I work with when I'm working in my M&A space, the best M&A exits that I ever work with start 2 years in advance at a minimum. If you can start working on that 24 months in advance, you probably put 20 to 30% more in your pocket. That can be $10,000, that could be $4 million. Really, however early you start working on it.
So my kids were not interested in taking on the business. For one, they thought I was just going to hand it to them, and I said, no, this is my retirement. But they were not interested in working the 70-hour weeks that are required when you're in food retail. We're open 362 days a year at the mall and 365 at the San Antonio airport. But we did have a strategic partner. There was a franchisee who had 75 locations who was wanting to get into Texas and to grow. I have certification at the airport, a DBE certification for being female-owned, and they don't possess that certification. So they actually, in order for them to get all the employees, we created a management agreement so that they run the airport. So finding a partner that has growth strategy in mind, we're looking at other opportunities to partner together because it's been a great partnership. And up until then, the only partner I'd ever had was my spouse. So I was a little worried about going outside of the business after 21 years to somebody outside the family. But I think knowing that my kids were not interested in it, I did. I was looking at exit strategy 2 years before it happened.
Well, before I ask any further questions, because I do have a list of questions in my hand, I just want to open it to the audience real quick to see if there's any questions in the audience.
So you decided to purchase into
So the question for those that might not be able to hear it, how did I get into this brand and how was I able to finance it? Because it is expensive starting out. Because I had a business background and I love numbers, I actually had a very thorough business plan that I did take to the bank. Because Auntie Anne's as a franchise system already had a demonstrated success rate, and they have what they call a rainbow sheet, which is what people in the industry had been doing on average. I took my traffic counts. I was able to come up with an average ticket based on these sheets and a pro forma, because this rainbow sheet, which shared financials, also had expenses and percentages that I should be expecting to pay. So I had a pretty good demonstrable rate of return. And with my background in accounting and finance and getting involved, I had probably a higher likelihood, but like the other ladies in the women entrepreneur panel, I had to sell my 401k. I cashed it in as my 30%. So nothing motivates you more than not having a choice. So people say all the time, wow, I can't believe you've been in the business for 24 years. And I say, I know, it's because I have leases I've obligated myself to. So as courageous as I'd like for that to sound, you're motivated by the commitments that you have to keep. But I would say, I also worked in the business 70 hours for the first 3 years. So I also felt the best way to demonstrate to my staff how to do it was to work alongside them. So for the first 3 years, I was head down, elbows up, doing everything that I asked my staff to do. And I was doing all the accounting and hiring, firing, staffing during the day, and working stores at night, and driving home smelling like cinnamon sugar pretzels, and getting up and doing it again the next day. So I think you had mentioned, if you don't feel like you have it in you, don't depend on other people to have that motivation for you. You've got to show them that you'll do absolutely whatever it takes. There were days that I did not enjoy what I was doing, but I didn't have a choice. You just keep on keeping on.
Any other questions out there? Well, we have a few more minutes, and I love to transition to this because I think a lot of times, one question here.
I have a question about scaling and growth from the formation point of view. Whether it be the LLC, LLP, C Corp, is there any particular formation that you think is easier to scale?
That's a true accounting question.
So I would say
He wanted to know what type of business structure should you have to be scalable?
So it depends what kind of scaling we're talking about, right? So in the traditional sense, when you're looking at venture-backed companies, if you want to take venture money, if you want to take private equity money, you want to be a C Corp. And if you're not there yet, you're probably then going to, if you start as an LLC, they're going to ask you to convert to an Inc. Before they put money into you. If you're not going that route, or you don't think that that's the route that you're going to be going in, and it's more a strategic buyout, I would say, the fewer partners you have, the LLC is fine. The fewer partners you have, the better, right? Because you need everybody to agree to a sale and all the terms. So the LLPs, which are partnerships, that's fine, right? But again, just how many partners are there? That's what I would say.
And I'll give an example. When I first started my business, I started it on my own. And then I realized that in order for us to not have family dynamics within my family, I added my brothers. So I changed my business structure to an S Corp because I added my brothers and my siblings to my business. So it all depends on how you start, and it's okay to change, transition. Like you're gonna start probably, a lot of people start with their personal Social Security number, which is probably not the best way to start, but sometimes you just wake up one day and you say, hey, I wanna start a business, and you're just using your personal Social Security number. And then you're transferred to LLC, and then before you know it, you might be an S Corp, and then you might be something else after that. So it definitely is a transitional period.
Sorry, can I add to that since you mentioned the S Corp? So an S Corp, you're still an LLC, but for taxes, you're designated as a corporation, which means you have a separate tax return. That is actually really conducive to being evaluated separately from your personal finances, right? Because if you're trying to sell yourself and you're showing your whole business tax return is part of your regular, your personal tax return, it's not as great. So yeah, if you're an LLC, having a separate tax return for the company is really helpful for sale.
Well, if there's no more questions, thank you guys.
Yeah. Well,
one more.
Well, we're out of. I'm sorry.
One more.
We're out of.
We're out of time.
We're out of time.
I'm sorry.
But they will be around. There is a reception afterwards. Thank you very much, ladies, for sharing your information with us.